This video is brought to you by John Robson Guitar Tuition. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting the channel by enrolling on a course, purchasing some guitar lessons or a t-shirt, or you can join my Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, I do hope you're well. Today's Tuesday, which means we're doing a top 5 list. And the sort of series of videos that I've been doing in this Tuesday slot over recent weeks has been all about my favourite guitar moments from various decades. And I want to stress here that these are my personal favourites, okay? I'm not trying to say that these are the most important or the most iconic or the most influential, moments of electric rock and roll guitar playing in any way. These are just my favourites, and you're probably going to disagree with some of them and possibly agree with some of them as well. Either way, leave your comments down below and let me know what your opinions are. If you think I've missed the bullseye or hit it full on, that's your call. Yeah, various decades. I started with the 70s a few weeks ago, then went back to the 60s, and now we're going to kind of come forward to the 80s a little bit. And, we'll see how far forward I go. There'll definitely be a 90s one, and we'll, 2000s, maybe we'll see. Maybe I'll even go back to the 40s or the 50s. Definitely the 50s. There'll be a 50s one. Anyway, these today are my favourite 5 guitar moments of the 1980s. And when I say a guitar moment, I mean it could be a solo. It could be a whole song. It could be an entire album. Just something that when I heard that particular bit of guitar playing, it set the hairs on the back of my neck, because I had some back in the 80s. It set the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end and made me think, oh, yeah, that's a bit good, isn't it? So, without any further ado, let's talk about my 5 favourite guitar moments of the 80s, starting with
Empty Rooms by Gary Moore.
Yeah, it's no secret that I am a massive, massive fan of certain Mr. Gary Moore and his guitar playing. By the time this album came out, which I think was about 83 or 84, I'd sort of had a little bit of an induction into rock music via the sort of late 70s stuff, the kind of Living After Midnight by Judas Priest, the whole Down to Earth album by Rainbow, and that kind of stuff. When rock bands started releasing singles and getting on top of the pops. I think Strangers in the Night, probably by UFO, was one that I'd discovered around about that time. And then rock just seemed to get a little bit silly, didn't it? It all became about sort of spandex and wearing loads of makeup and having, kind of bouffant hair and everything, and I just kind of lost interest in it, really, until at college I was sharing a hall of residence with, and this is how I discovered a lot of music back then, being exposed to other people's musical tastes by living in sort of a communal area. I think in 84 I was at college, and there was a guy living in the same building as me who was constantly playing this album, Victims of the Future, and the big ballad on that album is the first version that Gary did of Empty Rooms, and as far as I'm concerned, the best. Subsequent versions ended up sounding like he was doing some sort of Depeche Mode version of it, and it didn't really work for me. But this song, Empty Rooms, and specifically the beautifully, achingly melodic guitar solo that he plays on it. I'm going to link to all of these in the description, so go and check it out. It just really turned my head and sort of started to get me back interested back in rock music again. I could tell there was something a little bit bluesy about Gary's playing. It wasn't 12 bar, and it wasn't kind of Muddy Waters licks, but there was that kind of soulful bluesiness to his playing, which really kind of made me appreciate it, I think. But this is a fantastic album. First time I ever heard Gary Moore, and then I went back and kind of checked out his kind of early stuff with Thin Lizzy and so on, and it was the start of a lifetime thing, so definitely this song had to be on the list. Next,
Telegraph Road by Dire Straits.
Yeah, Dire Straits. The first album, Sultans of Swing, and, Down to the Waterline, Water of Love, Southbound Again, Six Blade Knife, all of those great songs on there. Fantastic. Then the second album, Communique, I wanted to like it, but could never quite get there. You ever had that experience with an album? That was Communique for me. That remains my my kind of thoughts on that album. It's the archetypal, difficult second album, I think. Stuff that it possibly it was songs that didn't quite make it or weren't good enough to make it on the first album, and kind of got put out as the second album. Anyway, third album, Making Movies. Yeah, that was pretty good, but this album, Love Over Gold, and the centrepiece of the album, Telegraph Road. I've spoken about this song many times on the channel. It is, by a country mile, my favourite Dire Straits song. It's just a cinematic epic of a song. Knopfler's lyrics are just, I think, the best he's ever written on this song. And the way the song weaves this narrative of essentially the rise and fall of a civilization over nearly a quarter of an hour, 14 minutes and however many seconds, is just a masterpiece. It's whenever I encounter somebody, and it occasionally happens, that is sceptical about pop music, when you meet a jazz buff, a dyed-in-the-wool jazz buff, or somebody that's entire musical catalogue consists of Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, that sort of thing, the classical fans basically, and they kind of the worst of that ilk can sometimes sneer and look a little bit down their nose at these oiks with twangy electric banjos making a god-awful racket in their opinion. I always play them Telegraph Road and say, yeah, what do you think of that? There's a weight to it, there's a heft to it, that it's a proper piece of music that I think is, it'll stand the test of time. Much like Dark Side of the Moon, I think this album, Love Over Gold, and that song in particular, will be things that kind of get looked back on by musical historians in 100 years' time or so, and you will be regarded as significant, and I certainly regard it that way. So that is Telegraph Road by Dire Straits. Next,
The Crush of Love by Joe Satriani.
Yeah, now, before guitar magazines had QR codes that you would scan to get all of the audio and these days video content that they want to give you. Before guitar magazines had YouTube channels for the same sort of thing, they used to come with a free CD. Anybody remember that in the 90s? Total Guitar CD, and the hilarious Guitarist magazine CD with the two characters on that, Jack and Bobby. Anyone else remember that? Am I the only one? Anyway, before magazines came with CDs, they used to come with this thing that you see on screen here, a little kind of flexi disc. It was essentially, it looks like a vinyl record, doesn't it? But it's about the thickness of I don't know, a thick piece of paper, and it's got that sort of, and it's basically a vinyl record that is really thin and was included in the magazine as a tear-out page. And it was on one of these that I first heard Joe Satriani playing this tune, The Crush of Love. And again, the whole kind of shredding sort of thing had kind of passed me by. I'd bought Yngwie's first album, or as you did in the 80s, you hear a lot of hubbub and hullabaloo about a particular artist, so you go out and take a chance and you buy the album without having heard a note of music on it. And I remember bought it on vinyl, put this first Yngwie record down on the turntable, put the needle on, and was absolutely gobsmacked and astounded at what I was hearing. But by the end of side one, I was bored. I don't think I ever flipped it over and played side two. So that kind of shows you, where I was with the whole kind of 80s neoclassical shreddy kind of thing. Not just Yngwie, but, Tony McAlpine and Vinnie Moore, actually, I kind of got into a little bit. But all of those kind of guys, it just sort of didn't float my boat. So I wasn't really a shred guitar fan. And then I had heard Satriani on this track, and it was shred, but it was it just had that element of blues about it again. You know, going back to the Gary Moore thing that I was talking about earlier, you could tell that that Joe had listened to all of the right records growing up. Basically, all the right records. You know what I mean? All the ones that that had an impact on me. It obviously kind of fed into his musical upbringing as well, and it showed on this fantastic tune here, "Crush of Love." After that, you know, I went out and did the same thing as I was talking about that Yngwie record. I went out and bought Surfing with the Alien, and that remains one of my favourite guitar albums to this day. It was almost on this list, but I thought, no, I've got to include the one which kind of actually introduced me to Mr. Satriani. So it is the Crush of Love, courtesy of a free tear out record in Guitar Player magazine, and I think about 87, I think that was. But no doubt you can correct me in the comments if you know different. But there you go. Next.
You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC.
Yeah, flying the flag for good old-fashioned rock and roll. As I said, in the late 70s, I was starting to hear, you know, Living After Midnight by Judas Priest, and, you know, what else would there have been? You know, You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC, and I think Doctor Doctor by UFO, and Since You've Been Gone by Rainbow, and all of these kind of hit singles that at the time, I know it's the definition has changed somewhat these days, but at the time in the late 70s, that was sort of referred to as heavy metal. I know the definition has changed somewhat, hasn't it? I used to have an album back then. It was just a heavy metal compilation, and one of the tracks on it was Rocky Mountain Way by Joe Walsh. Indeed, times change. But yeah, round about that time, I discovered AC/DC and this track here, You Shook Me All Night Long. This one just scrapes in under the wire, it has to be said. 1980 this came out, so that is, you know, part of the 80s. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a very famous interview with Brian Johnson by Howard Stern, where he's telling the story of, you know, how he auditioned for the band. I mean, fantastically funny interview. You know, Brian Johnson is a very entertaining raconteur, as it were. So go and check it out. And when they listened to the rough mix of this track back, and this is the first song that Brian recorded with the band, Brian said, you know what? I think that could be the best rock and roll song I've ever heard. And I think he's probably right. It's just, there's just such a joy about it. It's so tongue-in-cheek. If you see the video of this with Brian dressed up as Andy Capp, you know, kind of having a bath in the tin bath in the kitchen, yeah, just makes me smile. And it's a good foot-tapping tune, and I think, you know, AC/DC have done things as good as this many times. Have they ever bettered it? That's debatable, I think. So there you go. You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC. Next.
Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, as I said, in my humble opinion, rock music just got a little bit silly in the 80s. You know, I can't remember who it was, but there was one rock band that I didn't buy the album because I wasn't interested, but you know, when you're leafing through albums in record shops and you're reading the sleeves and what have you, there was one rock band in the 80s I remember kind of, you know, giving a big shout out to, you know, the kind of Marshall amplification and, you know, Ibanez guitars or whatever, and, you know, kind of Tama drums or whatever it was. They were giving a big shout out to L'Oreal, you know, for supplying them with all of their kind of, you know, hair care products. And yeah, it was that sort of thing that just a lot of the time turned me off. And then along comes this band that looked like the kind of greasy bikers from the, you know, from that kind of dodgy bar on the other side of town. And, you know, they're not wearing makeup. They're wearing kind of leather jackets and kind of, you know, street clothes. There's not an inch of spandex in sight. And the guitar player doesn't have, you know, some kind of leopard skin kind of coated, you know, pointy headstock, Floyd Rose equipped, you know, 80s hair metal plank of a guitar. this is rock and roll as it's supposed to be. And just that intro, name any other thing that sounds like that. It's hard to think, it's easy to think when you kind of listen to a lot of guitar players, that's sort of, I can see where you've got that influence from. That's kind of a little bit that, and you've been listening to this guy a lot. There's nothing like that you can think of, I think, with that intro riff to Sweet Child of Mine. It's just completely fully formed out of nowhere, and it did sort of that kind of become something of an influence. I mean, it's just any of these tunes where you get banned from playing it in a guitar shop, is an influential riff, isn't it? It's up there with House of the Rising Sun, Smoke on the Water, and Stairway to Heaven. And I teach kids these days that weren't even alive when this came out. They weren't even alive 10 years after this came out. And, they'll come into a lesson and they'll kind of play it to me because they're proud of this iconic lick that they've learned. And as I say, it brought, kind of rock music back down to earth again. It was possibly this late 80s. When was Appetite for Destruction? 87, was it? That kind of back to basics, that kind of gritty, authentic, not overly produced rock sound was possibly kind of a forerunner to the whole grunge thing of the early 90s. Music needs a reset every now and again to kind of prick the pomposity bubble, and this album and this track in particular, I think, did that. And I still listen to Appetite for Destruction today, and this is one of my favourite tracks on it and will remain so. Fantastic bit of guitar playing from Slash, and I really love it, and that's why it was on this list. So there you go, folks. Those are my 5 favourite guitar moments of the 1980s. There's probably one name on that list that is conspicuous by his absence, a certain Mr. Van Halen, but there you go. This is, as I said, my personal list. You probably have your own. Let me know what that is in the comments. But that's the video for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed what you've seen and found it entertaining and informative, in some small way at least. And if that's the case, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already done so, and why not drop me a like as well while you're at it. Don't forget the live stream every Friday 5 p.m. UK time. We drink beer and talk about music and guitars and the finer things of life. It's a great way to kick off the weekend, and I'd love to see you there if you can make it. But for now, I'll bid you all a good day and say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Look after yourselves, folks. Stay well, stay safe, and above all, stay sane. Bye for now.